An introduction to 1 and 2 Kings. Who? The 2 books of Kings bring to a conclusion the sequence of works attributed to the Deuteronomist. This sequence began with the reframing and expansion of the law in the form of a sermon at Mount Sinai, and it ends with the people being taken into exile in Babylon. It recounts the conquest of the land of Canaan and the stories of various kings, beginning with Saul and following after David. It includes the division of the land into 2 kingdoms, one in the north and one in the south. The gathered people at the start of this sequence in Deuteronomy are given the law and told what will happen should they disobey it. And then, with a few exceptions, we're presented with a picture of a disobedient people who move from unity at Sinai to disunity. They move from blessings to suffering and from a kingdom to exile. From this short summary, we can draw a thumbnail sketch of the Deuteronomist, the author, as either an exile in Babylon or one of the people who returned from that exile roughly 60 years after it began. This person or group of people had access to some details of the royal court, so perhaps they were an official, and maybe even somebody who'd been commissioned by one of the kings to write or to gather a history of Israel. We can also assume that the Deuteronomist lived in the southern kingdom of Judah, not the northern kingdom of Israel, which receives almost exclusively negative reports. When? The Babylonian exile began in approximately 597 BC, and as the Book of 2 Kings reports this event, it cannot have reached its final form until at least this date. However, it's also evident that the Deuteronomist incorporated pre-existing documents into his work and probably used other documents as references for his history. The opening of Kings, for example, which follows directly on from the end of 2 Samuel and details the succession of Solomon to the throne, appears to have been lifted almost in its entirety from another source. What this means is that it's possible the Israelites were already recording their history prior to the events of the Babylonian conquest, and also that a Deuteronomistic school may have existed to perform this task. The books of 1 and 2 Kings cite several texts which have been lost to history, including Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and Judah, and the Acts of Solomon. There's also the story in the Book of 2 Kings of the discovery of the Book of the Law, which some people believe to be the Book of Deuteronomy, but which possibly could also be another lost document. As a result, although the final text of 1 and 2 Kings is likely to date back to the exile, some of the stories it draws on could be considerably older than that. Why? As we've discovered, the Deuteronomist has a theological agenda which serves as an explanation for Israel's plight as exiles in Babylon. However, it's also interesting to note that the roles of 2 of the monarchs in 1 and 2 Kings are overplayed when we look to the archaeological evidence of their reigns. These 2 kings are Solomon, right at the beginning, for whom there's virtually no archaeological record at all, and Josiah, who reigned over a Jerusalem much smaller and of less political significance than it's afforded in the text. So why are the roles of these 2 kings enhanced in the books of 1 and 2 Kings? What is the author telling us? Solomon, of course, is important because he continues the Davidic line. Maybe there was some dispute about his succession, either at the time or during the exile. The Deuteronomist wants to establish beyond doubt that the descendants of David retained the throne, even though Solomon is not the first son, or even the most logical choice of heir. And Josiah. Josiah is important because of his role in centralizing the religious life of Israel in the capital city. He needs, for the Deuteronomist's point, to be an impressive character because he justifies the focus on adherence to the law, and therefore he needs to be seen to receive the blessings which are promised at Mount Sinai back in the book of Deuteronomy. 1 and 2 Kings, therefore, brings to a conclusion a series of books that's a call to unity, an encouragement to follow the law, and a cautionary tale telling the people what will happen if they fail to obey God.